Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Tinnitist TV. Today I am talking with Kira Roessler. Now, if you're a fan of vintage LA punk, she really probably needs no introduction. She was the bassist for the legendary Black Flag during the 80s. During that time, she played on classic albums like Slip It In and Loose Nut, and played hundreds of shows with the notoriously hard touring band, holding her own next to Henry Rollins and Greg Ginn during their intense, confrontational, and often violent shows. Amazingly, while she was doing all this with Black Flag, she was also attending UCLA, where she graduated in 1986. That is some pretty impressive multitasking. But it's kind of par for the course with Kira, who has gone on to balance her musical interests against her career as a dialogue editor for Hollywood productions. On the musical side, she's made several albums with Dose, her band with fellow bassist and former husband Mike Watt of the Minutemen and other bands. And on the Hollywood side, she's worked on Oscar-winning movies and has earned 2 Emmys herself for her work on Game of Thrones and the John Adams miniseries. This year, she finally made the time to focus on her own project and just released her self-titled debut solo album. It's a really artful and stylish and darkly beautiful collection of music that kind of falls somewhere between jazz and classical and post-rock, and really just showcases her nimble, angular bass playing and her personal, poetic lyrics. She and I recently spoke about her music, her time with the Flag, her editing work, and a lot more. Enjoy. All right. Well, listen, thanks so much for taking the time to do this today. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
It's nice to talk to you. You have a fascinating title.
Oh yeah? Tinnitist? I would think
Yes,
you could
I mean,
empathize after all that time with Black Flag, you know?
well, it's something that we as sound editors don't really like to talk about.
Uh-huh. But you keep asking someone to answer that phone in the other room. Is that the...
It's
So
just
listen,
something that's, it's the details of which are best left, to the individual. It's a little bit of a personal thing.
fair enough, fair enough. So listen, congratulations on this new album. I think a lot of people will be as surprised as I was to realize that is your first true solo album. What took you so long, and why now?
Great question. So the truth is, for the last, I don't know, 15 years easily, most of my creativity and stuff just happens in my room, and I develop songs, and I send them to friends who add little juicy tidbits, and I work with my brother at Kitten Robot Studios, and this was just something that I did for the love of the creation of the music. There was never any real desire, not even to share it with, people out there, because the joy of it was in the creation. And then one day, Paul Paul Roessler, my brother, said, I had known that Kitten Robot had now created a label, and he brought up the idea of putting out a solo album on that label, that the label made, that the people he was working with were interested. And for whatever reason, it was the right moment. I turned 60 this year, and it seemed like, okay, I'll do it. I'll do my first solo record at 60.
Well, better late than never. Was there I mean, given that you made these things without the expectation or even the desire to necessarily have them go wide, was there any trepidation on your part? Did it feel like you were kind of publishing your diary, as it were?
There's still an incredible amount of trepidation. Absolutely. My writing tends to be extremely personal, and I just am not someone who writes songs about whatever. I write them about very specific feelings I'm having. So there's trepidation in, will that, the desire, of course, is to let the listener feel something, but will that actually come across? Will the emotion come across? Will I connect? Or will people just say, oh, well, this wasn't the style of music we were hoping for?
Well, I don't think they would know what to expect. And I mean, stylistically, I think the greatest compliment I can pay this is that it doesn't sound like anybody or anything else but you, and it is almost unclassifiable. I mean, I was listening to it and going, well, this kind of sounds like jazz. And then at another point, I would go, well, this could be post-rock, and this is sort of bluesy, and this is kind of classical. Do you think of it as anything but my music? Do you see it as fitting in anywhere
Well,
aside from in your bedroom?
I consider that a compliment that
It
you say
is.
it's not like anything else, because I mean, isn't that what punk rock's supposed to be? Completely nonconformist. I've been a nonconformist since very early in my life. So no, I'm not good at classifying it. I think when my brother first asked me, I said emotional vomit. And I think they decided that was a negative term, you
Yeah, I
know.
don't think that's going to really be a good,
But
good
anyways,
sales pitch. Yeah.
it's it's funny that you say, you know, jazz, and you know, I have a classical background. I started on classical piano. I have a jazz background. I studied with a jazz teacher when I first started the bass guitar. And I obviously, you know, was heavily influenced by rock and roll and punk rock experiences in the past. So there is a great deal of, it's sort of like when you ask somebody about where their accent is from. You know, I get that often because my accent is I think kind of neutralized by having been influenced by different places. I was born on the East Coast, but I've spent a lot of time on the West Coast, and I spent a few years on a Dutch island speaking Dutch, you know, so maybe my accent truly is sort of just watered down to neutral. And in a way, music for me is it pulls from everything, you know, that I've done. I mean, I had been playing in DOS for 30 years, you know, so there's the two bass music is something that's very close to my heart, and bass as the root. And when you have two basses going, which most of the time in this record there are, you have to leave spaces. You have to be somewhat syncopated, and I think that's where some of the jazziness comes from. And when you mention blues, I mean, my absolute favorite, you know, true artist is Billie Holiday, you know, so I have this sensibility where I could only hope and to slightly touch on the way that great blues singers express emotions through their voice, you know, so that's definitely been an influence on me.
Well, I think it's evident, and I think all of those things you managed to pull them all together into something that, as I said, is very unique and wonderful. You talked about you know, making this sort of on your own, you know, over the course of time, alone in your bedroom. In terms of songwriting, I mean, are you sitting down with your bass and just sort of waiting for inspiration to come to you and recording on the fly, or are you somebody who gets an idea and then translates it? Because a lot of these songs to me will have a very almost not quite improvised, but I mean, they seem to flow and be very open, and as you mentioned, have a lot of air and not necessarily adhering to what most people would think of as traditional songcraft. So I'm kind of wondering how the idea gets, you know, out of up here and onto the tape or the computer.
Yeah, I think I feel like songs somewhat develop a life of their own. You know, I usually start with some kernel of an idea, you know, even a word or a phrase or an emotion that I'm trying to capture, and then, you know, maybe I'll pick up the bass and see if I can come up with anything that can connect with that idea. And and lately, at least in the last 15 years, 20 years, I have Pro Tools in front of me, which is a useful tool in terms of, working somewhat piecemeal. I've learned to make half an hour valuable in my life. So I might just record like one little snippet just to document it. And then I'll come back to it at a later date. So it's a iterative sort of add-on process, and maybe I'll sit down with that same concept and write a couple words. And sometimes the words are sort of free form at first. They don't come out necessarily like a poem. And then when I have a little bit of a musical structure, I'll try to sing along to it, and that will start to format a rhythm in the words. I mean, fundamentally, I'm a bass player, so the bass drives, the rhythm drives, melody is a fleeting thing I try to grab onto, but I think very rhythmically, and I think that the words and the singing ends up being, kind of like just another instrument that I'm fitting on top of, the bass and trying to work with. Sometimes there's very few words.
Right.
It's not really a big story. It's just an instrument that happens to be my voice.
But it sounds to me then like your approach is almost more painterly, in the sense of starting with a blank canvas, and you're not doing a landscape, you're doing something internal and going, well, I'll start with something here and see where that takes me, and there is a flow to the point where you go, okay, now it's done, as opposed to starting with the big picture of, I'm going to write a song about such and such, and
Well,
these are my endpoints.
There is a concept,
Yeah.
or a feeling, there is
Right.
um,
But it
a
takes you it
kernel.
might take you someplace where you weren't intending it to go necessarily, right?
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely. There's, and what I've noticed here of late is doing things like album artwork and making a video, that visual art, which I don't have any real practice at, is very much the same. I'll start with this idea and this vision of how the video is going to go, and when you guys eventually see it, it wasn't at all really exactly how I meant for it to be. It took on this life of its own, and I think that maybe that is kind of the way art is. It just took me a while to figure that out.
Well, it seems like if you talked about sending these songs out to people who you obviously know and trust and love to have a listen to and add and contribute to. And to me, that's a really sort of takes a lot of confidence, I think, and trust to do that, and not get something back where you go, oh dear, well, thanks, but
Well, the virtual band kind of concept has been going on in my life for a long time. Very early, I moved to Connecticut. Mike and my first dose record was sending 4-track tapes back and forth to each other, figuring
right.
things out across the country. And this guy who I played in bands with as a teenager, this guitar player, Glenn Brown, who lives in Ohio, he's been sending me songs and I've been sending him songs for a long time. There's been there's this huge body of work. As a matter of fact, during COVID, I worked to learn to mix and master a record for Bandcamp of his songs that I played bass on, but they're really his compositions. And so this has been something that feels very natural to me, and has felt natural to me. And I mean, you say, yeah, people I trust. I mean, these are the people who shaped me. He shaped me from a teenager. I always say that in some ways, the biggest influences on me are the people I play with. Playing with Mike Watt, playing with Glenn Brown as a guitar player, and Dave Bach, who plays the drums, seems to find a way to not just smash all over these very delicate songs. He is an amazing drummer in the sense that he gets that a Kira song, has to be held somewhat with a delicate touch, and it isn't a typical rock drumming situation, so yeah, there's a trust and there, and it's evolved over years and years. Petra Hayden is an idol of mine. She is an amazing singer and violinist and performer, and I'm just lucky to be someone who knows her and has spent a little time with her and has been able to ask her to give me some amazing tidbits for this record.
Oh, well, yeah, and obviously, she's contributed wonderful things. You mentioned working with your brother. Is that I can see that being the easiest thing in the world and the hardest thing in the world, depending. How do you work together as siblings?
My brother and I have a amazing relationship at this juncture. It was obviously not always that way as kids, but I think that because of the fact that my parents moved away when I was still pretty young. I was 15 when my mom moved away. She didn't abandon me or anything. It was just sort of a mutual agreement that could we make this work? Could I stay in Los Angeles with Paul? And she was moving to the Florida Keys and I didn't want to go. And we made a sort of deal, if you go to school and you behave yourself and Paul's not overwhelmed by your presence, you can. So I think because of that, he and I became very interreliant, and we became closer because of the fact that we were each other's family unit pretty early. That didn't go without any complications at all. And the first band experiences in Twisted Roots, they were his band, and I think he threw me out 3 times.
That's about par for the
course. I said, no, I'm never playing with you again, it's but we've both grown up and changed so much, and it's taken a lot of time to get to a place where we just are able to totally appreciate the relationship and each other's artistic temperaments, and with this music, it's he allowed me to let it be Kira music. I mean, he and I couldn't have more different styles. Paul's music tends to be very layered and lush and full, and to me it's like no, break it down, make it and we have a quite different style, and but it helps me to have someone where I bring this sort of little structure to him, and we talk about whether it needs anything else, and maybe he'll add something else and I'll pull things out, and we'll put things in and pull things out, right. So having that sensibility of him have layers being something that work for him does sometimes give me that one more tidbit that I need. But he's very much lets me, as a songwriter, I guess, I've always sort of thought that's kind of how it works. It's like the person who's the songwriter should sort of dictate how things go. That's why when I've been in other people's bands doing other people's music, I play, what do you want me to do? I'll do that. I think that that's important. It's not really a democracy.
Right. Well, speaking of bands that weren't democracies,
yeah.
Where I'm going.
Sure.
Here's the thing, I was amazed in reviewing, just going back over all the years and all the things, because, you did so much work with Black Flag, and I was just astounded to see what a compressed time it was done in. For me, it seemed to last, years and years and years, but it was really just over a couple of years. And I mean, is it all kind of a blur at this point? Because it must have been, like every other aspect of Black Flag, incredibly intense. I mean, you had intense people, intense shows, intense music, an intense schedule. Is it all just kind of,
Well, it's difficult to tell tour stories, because the tours do sort of, they're just a whole bunch of shows.
Sure, a
And
car
it's
and a
difficult
stage and a car
to
and a stage and a car. Yeah.
yeah, so it's sort of hard sometimes to place it in a city even, I know we went to those cities and I know we did all these gigs, but I don't have necessarily always even put them together, or
Sure.
envision that club in that city. But I joined my favorite band at the time, and part of that was because of that work ethic and the fact that they did it all the way. And when I got the tattoo, I said to myself, well, what it means to me is whatever you do, do it all the way. And so I knew what I was signing up for. I knew, what Black Flag was about. And also there had been an injunction against the name Black Flag. So there was a body of work sort of ready to go that just needed to be recorded and toured, so in a way things had been a little held back and the floodgates were opening right as I joined. So that was part of what made it such a flurry of activity, but it was no surprise to me. I also, continued going to UCLA and trying to do that.
That is even doubly astounding. I mean, that they would organize the touring around your schooling. I mean,
It was
that's
not good. It was not a good thing in the end. We did a winter tour. You don't tour in the winter, but we toured in winter because I had to do that fall quarter at UCLA. Now, it backfired a little bit, but I did appreciate them being willing to work around my schedule, obviously.
you ever go back and toss one of the albums on, or is it all stuff that you don't need to hear anymore because it's just, part of your DNA?
I don't know that I put on the records often. Sometimes I'll, on Facebook, a live show video comes up and I might click on it just to see if the sound quality is any good on that particular live video. And I'm often struck by, the physicality of it, and it kind of makes my neck hurt just watching myself, rocking up and down with this, heavy piece of wood on my shoulder, and you get a little crick in your neck, but yeah, I mean, I don't know that I put the records on, but I do sometimes check out something like that, and look, I have absolutely no regrets. I remember it all with fondness, and it was, a once in a lifetime type of experience, lucky me.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Talking about sound quality, I think something else, probably a lot of people who are only familiar with, your musical side, they don't know about you doing the sound editing and the dialogue editing for movies and television. That I mean, it seems kind of like an understandable lateral move. How did you sort of go from, Black Flag to sitting in a studio telling, I'm guessing, a voiceover artist to try that again with a little more emotion?
Well, there was something in between. I studied
Sure.
computers at school, and my thought was, if I wasn't doing music for a living, that people would always need computer people, so that was a good sort of backup plan. And I worked as a computer programmer type person for 11 years first, and because of the kinds of jobs I had, it was in the corporate world, and it really wasn't that comfortable. It wasn't a great fit for me in terms of the environment. And so I kind of was getting pretty tired of it, and I met a guy who was my brother was composing some music for him. He was working on the sound of a student film, a USC student film, and he had and they asked me to come in and do some bass work, and so I met this guy, and that was his sort of, plan to work. He had been at USC Film School, and was planning to do this little sound company, and that seemed like such a great combination of my music background and my computer background, because it was starting to happen in the computers. It was just transitioning really off mag film to compute, to Pro Tools and stuff. And I basically twisted the guy's arm, like, I'll come work for your company. I took a huge cut and pay. I'll answer phones. I'll do invoicing, and I'll make $8 an hour and learn this field out, and so he hired me at first to just be an admin person. And what happened was that there were 3 guys in the company, and what's interesting about the sound work is that dialogue tends to be a little bit more female oriented for whatever reason. The guys prefer to do the explosions and the guns and the the sound effects, and so there was clearly this little niche where the dialogue stuff wasn't what any of them wanted to do anyway.
Right.
So I started trying to focus on that, and I felt and still feel a affinity for that work. It's not particularly creative. It's more like solving a puzzle. How many problems can I fix before the mix? So it's like you're handed this set of production recordings generally, and they have a certain inherent problems, and you're just trying to make things work as best you can, and then recommend where something might need to be re-recorded in the studio to fix it. So it made sense.
Do the technical skills ever, do you feel they've had an impact on your art in terms of,
well, you can imagine in the old days when I made a mistake playing, I had to, punch into the tape, and these days I'm an editor, so I can add a verse. I can fix a mistake.
Yeah, but so it turns the song from sort of one static element into a bunch of pieces that you can manipulate as you see fit, right?
It does. My sensibility is still very very analog, so you'd probably be surprised at how analog the process is, but I definitely utilize the editing skills to make little fixes and stuff, little ticks that are in the because of the way my ears are from being a dialogue editor. Some of the little clicks and ticks that might not even bother some people, I'm fixing in there because I do that in the dialogue world.
Do people from one part of your life know about the other part of your life? I mean, do you ever get people coming into the dialogue, thing who go, wait a minute, aren't you? Does that, occasionally?
It's fun when it happens somewhat organically,
Sure.
and it just comes up. I love this story. I tell it. I was on the mixing stage, and I think I had a dose gig, and I was. We were sort of mixing, but there was a little bit of a downtime, and so I said something to the director about I do this bass thing, and I have a gig tonight, and he said that's really strange because I know of this other Kira who plays the bass guitar, and as he's saying it, he's sort of slowing me down and making and he's like, oh, and that part's it's kind of fun when it comes up like that organically. I obviously don't lead with it,
Sure.
But that's the thing about this kind of work that I love. You're working with creative people. A lot of them are there's musicians and they're creative and they are interested in art and stuff. And so you meet people who are very well versed in the musical world and who've heard of these these things that have happened in my life. I had another case where I was sitting in an ADR session where we're replacing dialogue, right, and the little ADR tech guy came downstairs because he was doing something, and he kind of leaned over to me. I'm sitting next to the director, and he kind of leans over to me and said, I just want to say I really love your work, and he ran back up to the booth, and the director leaned over and said, me too. And I was like, we had never talked about it. We didn't really talk about it anymore. It was just that, in that moment, he opened up. But there's a very clear hierarchy in the work too. So the director's up here, and I'm definitely just a cog in the wheel, and so there isn't any the street cred is fun, but it doesn't necessarily change the world in that arena.
No. But I mean, it's at some point, I think, well, you've got 2 Emmys now, right? If I've got that right. And do you actually have an Oscar? Is it?
I don't. What happens in the Emmys, the whole team that wins get the hardware, but in the Oscars, only the supervisors get the hardware. So I was on a Oscar winning team, but I was not a supervisor. I was also on a nominated team just recently on Joker. So
congratulations.
So yes, I've worked on some amazing projects, and we've gotten some recognition, which is fun. The Emmy, I was shocked because the way that works at the ceremony, they just hand the supervisor the hardware, and he gives a little speech, and then as we went into the backstage, they handed us all hardware, and I was like, wow, that's so cool. So yeah, I have those, and I do not have any of the others.
Well, I think someday within our lifetime, God willing, there'll be some sort of a Hall of Fame Grammy for you.
I doubt that, but that's okay. I don't do, as we talked about, I don't do this for the accolades.
Yeah.
I'm actually, this record especially, I'll be somewhat shocked if people do actually respond to it in a good way. I mean, it's very strange music, as you pointed out. It's not like anything else. It's not like you can tap your foot or whatever,
Oh, it's not going to be on the car radio, but it'll be in a lot of people's playlists. Have you got now more music on the way? Is this the beginning of something, or was this just kind of the clearing out of the closet, so to speak?
Well, there's certainly a lot more. Like I said, this has been a continuum where there's all sorts of that sort of ilk, material. This particular grouping, when he asked me, was in some ways the furthest along, and it did tell a bit of a story, and it felt like something that tying a bow around it, worked. And I don't have a visual yet on another thing, but there's plenty of music.
Oh, there's plenty more where this came from? Okay.
Yes, it doesn't stop for me. Whether or not it comes out in this kind of way, I don't know, but I'll keep working in my room, and I'll keep going to Kitten Robot and playing with Paul. We did it just the other day. I said to him, look, just because this record's coming out, I don't want to stop doing our thing. I like to make songs, so we do.